enjoy the not knowing everything. It's really something very few people will probably tell you, but some of the best things in directing and filmmaking come from that, and you'll only get it once. You only direct your first once. To allow yourself to not know and to go in and, you're going to make choices, you're going to do all that, that's fine. But you're also going to discover some things, and you're going to try things that might be ill-advised because you don't know, and they might be the best things you do. This notion of professionalism in art, it's a misnomer. We never get there. Hopefully, if we're doing real work, we never fucking know. We have to be vulnerable and fragile every single time. And if we're not feeling that way, if we're experts, we've lost our way. My name's Darius Marder. I am the co-writer and director of Sound of Metal. Hello.
Darius.
Hey, Darius. How are you?
Hey, Darius.
Hey.
How's it going?
Thank you for joining us, and thanks for sending over that clip that you chose, Stillness. And what we'd love for you is to just bring some context to the scene and sort of break it down for us.
Well, it's cool. We're calling it Stillness. This film, on a writing level, was very much about how do you start to actually feel this concept of stillness? How do you feel it? Like, it's one thing to talk about it, but how do you feel it?
To the deed. The deed. Surgery.
So it was always about, there were these benchmarks in this movie. This scene is one of them. And it was about earning it. How are you going to get into this scene and actually care enough for this character, for the fragility of this character, and the awareness of this kind of higher wisdom that he's not necessarily emotionally intelligent enough to recognize in this moment. How do you earn that? How do you get there? And so, the whole progression here, which begins with this kind of onslaught of noise in the beginning of this movie, and the music they play, but also the energy that he has. It was just beginning that, it was kind of hitting you, awakening your senses, then having it removed, then going through this whole visceral process, recognizing how fragile he really is, recognizing that this problem is actually not, in fact, the physicality of deafness. That's not really the problem. That's not actually the conflict in this movie. It's the conflict for Ruben, but it's not the conflict in the film.
I wonder, all these mornings you've been sitting in my study. Sitting. Have you had any moments of stillness?
So here's a really interesting thing on a screenwriting level, because this is what happens in the scene. How do you feel an addict and the precariousness of an addict without ever seeing a drug? My brother and I, we wrote a lot of pages for this, in order to get to this story. We probably wrote 1,500, 2,000 pages. We wrote it in every single direction. And part of the reason we wrote a lot of Ruben's backstory, we really lived into him as a character. We also did the same for Lou. We wrote a lot of the songs and the poems. We wrote her whole journey to Europe that's off screen. And part of that is just to really feel the sense of veracity of character. You don't really enter into a movie like this, and for Riz as an actor, you don't really enter in going, oh, I hope this looks real. It has to be very, very specific. And Ruben underwent a massive amount of abandonment trauma as a young kid, and he doesn't look back. He doesn't talk about it. He doesn't deal with it. He goes forward. If he's not doing that, he's numbing the pain, and that's where narcotics comes in. So Joe's not saying, so Ruben, let's talk about your life. Right. He's not saying, he knows Ruben can't talk about his life. He knows why someone looks to numb pain. He's not saying, let's
I
process.
understand the situation.
He's saying,
Put
you
yourself
know, if your brain is too noisy to sit with yourself, just throw words on the page. And the reason to throw words on the page is that some of that shit will find its way to the page. Some of that stuff you can't even afford to think about will find its way to the page. And in that way, you start to kind of involuntarily process some of those things. And that's what allows you to maybe sit for a second. You know, maybe after you've gotten some of that out, you kind of just go, ah. And there is one moment when Ruben does that in the story, when he sits in that room. And so in a way, you know, part of the structure of this film was to kind of bring us into this feeling of, okay, we know what it's like to not be in stillness, and we know what it's like to taste stillness. Where is Ruben now? So here we enter this scene. Where is Ruben now? And that's the kind of framework that begins the conversation of that scene. It's also the crossroads of Ruben's kind of stages of grief.
Honestly, it was a complete surprise to even find out that he was on heroin. I was like, oh shit,
Yeah.
I didn't take him to be a heroin addict. Like, no way. Like that came for me. I was like, man, that was a great reveal. That was something that, you know, some insight to the character.
Yeah, that scene was something else. I mean, there's something about even all the just kind of like the recovery stuff, like the recovery parlance and like a lot of the behaviorism and all that stuff of people in those places and
That's right.
and the leaders in those places, you know, someone is like, that is Joe. And it's like, it was heartbreaking in a way, you know, where Joe kind of, spoiler alert, I guess, you know, turns his back on him in a way, but it's like, you know, it was just remarkable, that scene and the pain that kind of Joe releases at the end of that, you know, where he's just like, it ain't going to happen, you know, pack your bags and go. It's like, man, you know.
Well, that's a great thing you bring up. You know, I think that Joe gives Ruben two gifts in this scene. And one of the gifts is telling him to get lost.
Yeah.
One of the gifts is kicking him out.
Yep.
And, you know, that's a gift because, you know, Ruben finds, you know, codependence in life. He finds ways to not deal with shit. Joe, that you're never going to do that with Joe, you know? So when Joe sees that addict, he knows there's no way. He knows there's only one way to deal with an addict. I mean, there's a couple things going on. You know, there's the fact that he has a group of deaf addicts that he's in charge of, and he can't, you know, put them in danger by having someone in Ruben's state around, and that's straight up. You know, imagine being on a boat. You know, I talked to Paul a lot about this. You know, imagine being on a boat, and you have a member of the crew that's going to endanger everybody. You know, you got to deal with it. You got to deal with it.
Yeah.
And you know, so that's some of the energy that was there. And you know, for Paul, it was heartbreaking. For Joe, it was heartbreaking because this is his flock. You know, he's a caretaker, and he loved Ruben, and we know that. But he's not gonna put everybody in danger, and he's not gonna bullshit Ruben. It's like, man, I know you need to deal with something, and you need to walk down that lonely ass road, and that's the only way you're gonna deal with it. So get the fuck out of here.
Yeah. Joe felt like such a real person.
Yeah.
Like I can't really describe like the feeling he gave me while I'm watching this film, other than he felt real, you know, like that this person has actually lived this lifestyle. And I guess, Darius, what is your character development process? How do you come up with these people that feel so authentic and real?
Well, usually it's drawing from something that's really, really, really specific. And in the case of Joe, that was true. You know, it was coming from an experience I've had with a real character. And they don't generally come out of the ether, you know, and very, very similarly to how an actor accesses truth, which I think is really interesting about process. You know, I think writing and acting are similar in this way, which is, you know, acting when it's really transcendent is connecting with a truth that might seem incredibly far from your own, but actually isn't. You know, like you know, Riz really found that in playing Ruben. Like Ruben's probably more different than Riz at least he thought,
Mm.
and than any other character he's played.
Mm.
But actually what Riz found in searching is that there were these kind of incredibly strong, there's every actor has this, like, what I call a garden of truth. There's these things they can draw from, real experiences that they have on a cellular level inside them. And when you can connect with that, that's when that really specific, transcendent kind of performance comes from.
Mm.
And, so obviously Paul was drawing from a very rich garden,
Yeah.
and that's what we do as writers. I think that you draw, what do you have in there? What do you have to find? And I think the process is about unearthing those things in you that maybe you're not even aware of. I mean, it took a while to find Joe, but once I found him, man, I know Joe.
Yeah.
I mean, writing him was just a flow state.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he's the kind of guy you want in your life. Like, everybody would want a Joe in their
Oh,
life,
yeah.
to be real, cut through the bullshit, and just
Yeah.
tell you how it is, what you really need, not what you want, but what you need in life. Darius, did Riz share, like, sort of how he prepared to get into the role of playing Ruben?
Oh God, yeah. I mean, one of the really exciting things that Riz and I did right from the beginning is kind of, we set a really audacious process in motion. So he was kind of, this is what we were going to do. You're going to shut off the whole world. And that's a hard thing to do in Hollywood, to shut off, like, not take scripts, not take meetings, move to Brooklyn and prepare this character for 7 months, and do nothing else, and learn drums from scratch, and learn ASL, learn a whole language, go to AA groups, go to NA groups, go to codependent anonymous groups. You're going to work with me. We're not working on the script. We're just working on the foundation of character.
Wow.
And so the amount of work that went in before we even hit set was kind of intense. And, so, even down, of course, all the tattoos are specific. They all mean very specific things, the clothing, the hair, also his accent's from a very specific place. It relates to a character that he met, who's a drummer in a band called Surfboard, a guy named Sean Powell, who was an intense heroin addict. So it's like a, Texas meets Arizona accent. It's like really, really specific character foundational stuff.
Yeah, that's crazy. I mean, you have backstory for people that we don't even see in the film or mention.
Everything in the film has a backstory. There's nothing that doesn't have a backstory.
Wow.
It's really interesting, actually, as it relates to writing. It's fascinating. How is it that the world understands when there isn't a foundation under something? It's like, well, how do we know that?
Right.
Why do we feel that? Some of it's ineffable. Some of it's inexplicable, but some of it isn't. These little things, the small gestures, the movements, the way Ruben walks, the way he holds his body. It's some of it's the muscles that he built. Literally, Riz built these muscles. He built a body that Ruben would have. It's a body he's never had as Riz. So some of the way he walks is because his body feels different. It's a controlled body. It's an addict's body.
Right.
It's a body that needs to stay in control. It's a body made of smoothies and exercise.
Right. Wow.
That's insane.
What was the casting like? I mean, did you always have Riz in mind, or, what was that like, the process? And obviously, I mean, he was masterful. I mean, what a performance. Jeez.
He's masterful. He did something really special. I didn't always have Riz in mind. I didn't know who Riz was when I started writing, and Riz was at the very edge of his career when I started writing this. I mean, I started writing this, 10 years ago.
Wow.
So yeah, and I didn't know who he was, and I had been already casting for years before I met Riz. And going into a meeting with Riz, I didn't know if he would be Ruben or not. I knew he was insanely talented. It's not hard to see that with Riz. It's not hard to watch, Night of and The Night of and wonder if the guy has talent. But I didn't know if he was Ruben. It wasn't until I met him and saw and, really kind of understood who he was that I realized what he had to bring to Ruben, which was super exciting, which was the fact that
Riz is kind of a savant. He's kind of a control freak in a good way. He's a real artist, but he's really intense, and he's looking to kind of devour everything in front of him. We joke and we call each other gobblers because we're always just trying to like gobble everything. And Riz was just wants to devour everything, and so there was this opportunity in this movie to actually create a scenario where he had to give up control. And that's the piece of him that's very much Ruben. He had to relinquish control. I didn't allow, in all these scenes in this movie, I didn't allow for control. Like, he was wearing custom-made ear devices that emitted a white noise. He couldn't even hear his own voice. Wow. He was literally and physically off balance. It was like, the music in the beginning of the film, it's played live. There's an audience there. I even told them I'm not even shooting so I can cheat it. There's no cutaways. There's no ability to cheat it. So they had to actually earn it. And that's relinquishing control. That's saying, look, there is no control here. You just have to be there.
That's insane.
And it's an intense thing to do. It's really scary. And that's what makes it palpable. You feel it in every moment. And it actually relates to this scene of stillness, because one of the things that I did that's difficult to do on a film set is I shot chronologically.
Wow. Wow.
So everything is in order. And what that means is things had stakes, you like once you have tinnitus, you have tinnitus. And, once you lose your hearing, your hearing's gone. And so, even in between shots, I had to write things down for Riz, notes. I couldn't just talk to him. We were doing sign language.
Wow.
So that scene with Joe, that marks a whole shift because it's chronological. So that goodbye's goodbye. That's the last time they see each other.
Wow.
That's the last time we're at that beautiful place with all the deaf cast. It's all gone after that. There's a sense of loss, and we all felt it,
Darius, do you find that shooting a film in chronological order, like you said, like you can't really go back, right? I mean, that you've already done that. Do you think it's better for storytelling purposes to shoot in chronological order?
Well, infinitely better. It's hard. The creative process is always begging us to control it. We all want to control the creative process, because then we're safe. Then everything's okay. But actually, inspiration and impulse, they don't come from control. They come when we let go, when we trust. And that's always frightening. It's always frightening to do that. So shooting chronologically is wonderful, because you're declaring this thing. You're saying, look, there is no going back, just like you say, just like life.
Yeah.
Something's going to happen, and then we'll move on. And, that's the way this works. But can't we do that? No, we can't. So like when Ruben and Lou say goodbye in the parking lot and have that scene, and she drives off in the taxi, she has to leave the set. She's gone. She's not allowed. She's not allowed there anymore. That's goodbye.
Wow.
And then we don't see her again until the end of the movie.
Wow. So they were separated for that whole time.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's
incredible.
Did you notice your script start to change a little bit by shooting this way?
No, the script is the script, but I was always checking in with the script as we went to make sure that it was as efficient and on the money as possible. The reason for that is that, we didn't have the kind of budget where you could just shoot extraneous things. And, so it was really just about focus. And I think that, I was really glad to be a screenwriter in those times, because, you can really stay in touch with how do we make sure that every scene is, we have the time and the presence for every scene. We cannot fuck around.
Speaking of the script, like, did this story come from was it inspired by anybody real that you might have known?
Well, Ruben it was very personal to both me and my brother, but actually this story began with a friend of mine named Darius in France, and he and I wrote Place Beyond the Pines together, and we do a lot together. But the very first thing we talked about was this movie. That was 13 years ago.
Wow.
And he was shooting a band called Jucifer, who are a noise, they're a metal band, like a doom metal band. And just like Ruben and Lou, they're a couple, live on the road.
Oh,
So he
wow.
was shooting this real band. Now the characters of Ruben and Lou have little to do with Amber and Edgar, who make up Lucifer, but the construct was there, and this whole so it was really I took over this kind of hybrid doc that Derek was making, and I just started over and wrote it.
Wow.
So it actually did come from real people.
It seems like you come from kind of the documentary space, or you worked a lot in docs, and this movie is just like so hyper real. Directing this, it's like crack that hyper real kind of thing. Like, do you think, coming from doc, do you think that was just kind of natural, or is that, do you kind of have to maintain that kind of work at that to keep that hyper real thing? And that kind of plays into the improv of it. Did you kind of allow that? Did you encourage improv, or was everything just on the page,
Most things were on the page, but there are some sections where I really wanted it to be very free flowing and improvisational. A lot of the stuff that comes from deaf culture, I really wanted those moments with the kids to almost feel like a documentary, to feel like you're just peering into a culture that most of us haven't seen.
Yeah.
And then, there's some sections like when they're driving, together, Lou and Ruben are driving, we had long sections of improv while they're just kind of talking. And, the script reflects, the script wants it to be chunks and moments on the road every day. So you kind of just feel a sense of what they do every day.
Mm-hmm.
And you feel it being true. Like, that's what people do. They talk about fucking everything in the world.
Right.
Was this your directorial debut?
Yes. Yeah.
Wow. Could you speak into that a little bit more? Like what was that like, being first time director on set, and maybe speak into some of the challenges that you face on a day-to-day basis?
Well, the act of directing for me feels very natural. It was a very joyful process, actually, directing. It's a highly charged process, and I think that if anything, I like highly charged, I like that filmmaking, there's a sense of danger when you're making a film, and it's there's a lot at stake, and I quite like that. I think that, again, where it's difficult as a first-time director, when you have kind of audacious ideas, that, at first everybody's like, oh, this guy, not everybody, but there's a certain number of people that want to let they know what's up. Right. They know what's best. And, I always said to everybody, look, I only get one shot at not knowing, like the best things come from trusting instincts, and that's the way we're rolling on this thing. I'm not, if you think I'm here to like be a professional, no worse word than professional. Like, go back to making a series for Netflix or something. That's not what we're after here.
Right.
We're after, a live living experience, period, full stop. And, I've been planning this movie for over 10 years at this point. And I, I'm a freak, I'm into this. So I was making choices and living with choices, and happy to do that. And I think that, even if it was very different for a lot of people in the beginning, a lot of people that thought professionalism was awesome, it shifted. And I think as we shot, people went, something's happening here.
That's insane. 13 years in the making. Did you become more confident in your story, or as time, kept ticking on, were you like, what, like you said 1,500 pages of the
2000, right?
Something like that.
Somewhere in that range. But we wrote a lot of different versions of the various scripts to kind of get here, and different versions of different characters, different versions of Ruben, even different names, and Lou, and everything. So it wasn't like we had a 1,500 page script. It was, but yes. So did I become more confident once I knew that story had hit it? I never lost that. I mean, I always knew the story had this core, and I just had to earn it and find it. Once that happened, it was, man, I never doubted it. Again, I doubted everything else. Like, finding financing, all finding the right actors, all of that stuff is fucking hard. But
For me, like, I've never, I haven't spent 13 plus years on a script before, but like the time that I do spend on whatever I'm working on, and the longer it goes, I start to question, like, what the hell, like, is this even good? Is this like, what am I doing? And I'm guilty of abandoning it. So I'm amazed and inspired by this 13-year journey, and the fact that, you grew more confident in it as time went on.
Yeah, it never lost excitement for me at all. I knew there was something really exciting about this project. Like it never went away. And there were so many different moments where the world kind of tempted me to think it was shit. Like, I remember when Whiplash won Sundance, and like everybody came up to me and was like, dude, I'm sorry, they made the drunk movie.
Wow. Right. Wow.
I'm like, oh, for God's sakes. It's so funny. It's like, we don't do that with space movies.
Right.
I didn't even think of Whiplash watching this movie.
Interesting.
And,
No, I didn't.
What was that like? Like the process of, you said, like the financing eye roll, like which we all know about, but what was that? Was that a major hurdle, or was there a point in the movie when the script's written? Well, the script had been written for a long time, but where everything just kind of shot to the moon, where it's like, all right, this is happening, or was it okay? If we got to finance it and all this sort of rigmarole.
Yeah, I went through a lot of financiers, a number of them, and really it came down to, it's one thing to get a movie financed. It's another to be able to make the movie you want to make. And they are two separate things. And sometimes financing is like a deal with the devil. Yeah. It has these, we'll finance it, but you have to do this, you have to do that. And where's the line there? And that was a tricky one for me, and I had a kind of a certain amount of strike policy. And then when people, say they're going to do one thing and then do another, which happened a whole hell of a lot of times, I had this whole film set up to go with a whole different cast and fully financed. And the financiers at the last moment just said, oh, we don't have the money. And then I had it financed again. And then even 12 days before shooting, I had different financiers who started to make demands, like editing demands, and started to, wanted producer fees. And all of a sudden I had 19 days to shoot the film now, given the amount of fees that they wanted. So I just said no. I said, no, I'm not doing it. And
how many days did you actually shoot the movie in?
About 25.
Wow.
Which is not a lot. It's kind of a quietly epic movie,
Yeah,
I mean, it
sure is.
Seriously.
That's
really,
something I wanted to talk about was the sound design in this. It's like some of the greatest like sound design I've ever heard in a movie, with like also the lack of sound, So it's like, it's crazy. Like I was wondering, especially the moment where, Ruben, after he's had the surgery, and the noise he hears when he's able to finally hear, like how.
Oh yeah.
Is that accurate to what someone in his situation would have heard?
The modulated
kind of
thing?
The way it is. Is that accurate, or is that something you guys completely came up with?
Oh no, believe it or not, it's tame.
It's tame.
Yeah. The deal is, if you're an adult and you get a cochlear implant, no, don't get me wrong. This film doesn't like editorialize about whether cochlear implants are good or bad. The film doesn't have an opinion about that. But the one thing that is true, objectively true, is if you get cochlear implants as an adult, especially, your brain is just like confused as shit. It's for people who were profoundly deaf for their whole life, they're hearing sound for the first time. And they don't measure that sound against something else. Wow. But if you're late deafened, especially if you were a musician, or in Ruben's case, an audiophile, and you get cochlear implants, like it's much harder than what's portrayed in the film. I really tried to push the boundaries to what we can stand, and there were times in the cut where it was too much,
right.
And it's not just the sonic register, it's also the directionality. Your brain doesn't know where sound's coming from, because it's bypassing your cochlea. It has nothing to do with it. It's a signal that is hitting it's a digital impulse that's hitting your brain, and your brain's sorting it. So over time, our brains are so amazing that over time, we will sort out those sounds and start to code them and understand them. Children do that really well. Adults do it less well, where we get less flexible as we grow. So yeah, it's super accurate. And people that have gone through this have told us as much. They've said, wow, that is a bit like how it is. And but there's so much nuance to it. And as a nod to the audiology community, I know that there's a huge amount of nuance. Now they have ones where you can block out background noise and this and that. It's constantly evolving.
It's amazing.
I just got the chills hearing you say it's tamed, and I'm like, what the hell? Like, jeez,
that's what I mean. That's what this film did for me, man. Was just the insight it gave me into the deaf community. Like, I've never even thought of like what that's like. And just the language barrier too. Like when you just get the voice memo or recorder up on the screen where it's just that alone. I'm just like, oh man, like, and you totally like, you put yourself in Ruben's position. You're like, I would fucking run away. Like, I wouldn't know how to handle that. Like, you know?
How are you, Ruben?
I'm okay.
You're an addict?
Yep.
It reminded me of the act structure. And I want to ask Darius, I want to ask you about what kind of story structure you use. And it reminded me of like the denial and anger. That
stages of grief.
The stages of grief.
Yeah.
Did that play a role in writing the script and writing Ruben? Was like the 5 stages of grief?
Yeah, they're very present, actually. They're really present. If we talk about the 5 stages of grief, let's go through them, right? So right in first, Ruben, the very first thing you see is Ruben's like, no, I'm good.
Right.
Yeah.
And the guy at the audiology place says, just stay away from noise. And what does he do? He goes and plays. That's denial.
Right.
Anger comes, then he's thrashing around in the Airstream. And then the third one, we have bargaining, depression, and then acceptance, right?
Yeah.
Correct.
So the bargaining is really leading us to that scene with Joe. If you look at what's happening in that scene with Joe, what has he done? He's sold his Airstream. He's set up a construct where he's literally bargaining.
Yeah.
Right.
And then he goes with Joe and he's like, man, can I do this money? Because I got to do this and I got to do that. He's bargaining.
Yeah.
He's like, no, because I'm going to go here. Oh, it's okay. I'll ask her. She has a rich father. I'm going to do this. So it's all bargaining. And then depression. And depression shows itself in a number of moments, depression at the party when he's standing alone in Europe. He's really alone. Depression when he sees and hears her sing and we realize he can't really hear. He's lost music and you see his eyes. These are the layers being peeled back. It's depression. And the depression when he walks away and he's sitting on the bench and he's looking at this sound, that sound, these are all things that are killing. And then of course the bells and the very first thing, it's just like that sense of abandonment, that sense of, being unseen and the world moving on. And then finally, just in the last moments of the movie is acceptance.
That was the most amazing ending.
Yeah.
Like it made you smile. And
it was so cathartic and so satisfying.
There was several moments in the movie where I rewinded to watch performances. It was just like, and I found myself sitting on the edge of my seat, really, especially with the moments with Joe. And then the other moments were the group moments. During those moments, I find myself just glued to them. And these actors in here, especially the teacher, can you talk a little bit about the ASL of it and sort of those actors and the casting of them perhaps and a little bit of that, because that was really made a huge impression on me, to be honest.
Oh, well, thanks you guys. I mean, that was awesome. I mean, this was like the real idea here is to allow the deaf community. Now, deaf culture is a big word. There's a lot that falls under the umbrella of deaf culture. I mean, there's all manner of subcultures. So this movie, it really just wanted to allow some subsets of deaf culture to represent themselves. And part of the idea here was to remind and show and suggest that, it's not a monolith, there's deaf addicts, where there's deaf gay addicts. There's an addict here who's Hispanic and has been in gangs. There's, not everybody isn't defined by just their deafness, and, so Lauren Ridloff is a teacher, and she in fact was a teacher in her life. For 10 years, she taught kids. So she brought this sense of, everything she does with those kids is from her own experience teaching deaf kids. And the games that they play up in the field, one of them's like an elephant game. It's unique to the deaf culture, and something that may have not even been on screen before. And then, even a deaf dinner. A member of the cast told me afterwards, he said, look, that's a deaf dinner. Drinks always spill, every single deaf dinner, because it's super physical, and
right, because they're hitting the table, getting each other's attention, right?
Wow.
Yeah. And the more animated the conversation gets, the more shit's going to fly. And it's like, it's something that deaf people don't do when they go to restaurants in hearing culture. They assimilate more. And he said to me, he's like, you're seeing something that we don't really share very often with hearing culture, so it was really special. And again, that's them representing themselves. That was really just pure.
Yeah. You just happen to be there with a camera.
That's how it's meant to feel, that we happen to be there with a camera. Obviously, that was its intention, but it was really the sense of, I think the trust that we had on set, and the sense of kind of that community feeling they could share it, and live into it. And yeah, casting was amazing. It was like a lot of the people in that community are actually people that have dealt with addiction, and some local deaf people from Boston.
Wow.
So it was just like an incredibly rich experience. Casting Joe was really hard, because he's an interesting character. He has a foot in the deaf community, a foot in the hearing community. He's a veteran. He's got all these like specific aspects to his character. And so casting that role was super different.
Just those little moments throughout the film, like even the teacher flickering the lights to get everyone's attention. And it's just like,
it's just stuff like, like I wouldn't think I don't even think actually happens, but it's really cool to see all that,
But is that stuff something like someone taught you being on set? Like, we would do this. We'd flick the lights off to get everyone's attention. Or was this just 13 years of researching this world?
It was both. I spent a lot of time in deaf communities, while we were writing, and so things like flicking the lights are things that I knew, but then there were a lot of things that the deaf community, just were like, nope, it's like this, or nope, it's like this. No, this is what we do. And, that was the greatest thing. That's what I wanted,
That's great.
I was really open to, it's not my culture, to represent. And so I just wanted it to be like that. And that's how it was. It was awesome.
Darius, your brother Abraham, he wrote this alongside of you, correct?
He did, man. We wrote this over many years in Brooklyn. It was awesome. It was intense, it was like it was a long journey.
What's that like? Because we're brothers. We write in the room. We almost kill each other. Almost every word we put on page. I mean, it's crazy. So it works. It works though with us. But
how do you guys do it?
Best idea wins. You know, you can't argue with that. If it's kind of like it's democracy. It's not a dictatorship. It's like, hey, what does everyone think? The majority votes, and that's what we go with and move forward. Otherwise, you could be on page 1 on the first line of action for weeks and not go anywhere.
That's awesome. Best idea wins is something that a lot of people say, but a lot of people don't do.
Yeah, that's true.
But we can be brutally honest, like we're not afraid to tell someone to F off.
Yeah, one thing we would do is if someone has a bad idea, we'd say pull, and it's like skeet shooting. You throw your idea up in the air, and everyone like pretends to shoot it down.
It's awesome, you guys. That's the way. We, actually interesting and apropos of Sound of Metal, I couldn't get the ending right of Sound of Metal, the whole ending, the whole last part I just couldn't nail it. And Derek and I had been trying to get to land this book, which Empire of the Summer Moon concurrently while I was working on Sound of Metal, and we couldn't get it. It was with like Ridley Scott and various places, and it had even been written into a script. And then already it was just one of those hard properties to get. And then at one point he called and he's like, "Hey, we got it." And I was like, "Shit, that's amazing." But I'm writing Sound of Metal, you know, and I was at that time just banging my head again, trying to get the end of this film right. And so I actually said no at first, and I wasn't getting paid to write Sound of Metal. You know, this was I had like starving children and no insurance, you know. So I eventually said yeah, and I wrote a draft of that over the course of 5 months or something. It was so intense because, as you know, it's a thick tome. It's like, you know, 500 years of history. So I wrote this ridiculous draft, like 250-page draft, and when I finished, I kind of looked up from this draft and I remembered Sound of Metal that I hadn't thought about in all that time. I had really put myself to this other project, and I just, like, that end of Sound of Metal just flowed right out.
Wow, how about that?
Wow.
That's incredible.
It's a lesson as a writer I hope to never forget, you know, because it was like the letting go and, you know, putting myself to a different thing for whatever reason, man, it just flowed out. I wrote the last part of that in 3 weeks or something, you know. And that was
I love how long you sit with them too in that moment.
I love that.
You know, you're kind of waiting for it to cut to black and the credits come, but it keeps going and you're just sitting there and just like, this is incredible, you know.
Really?
Yeah, that's really cool. You know, that was a funny thing to shoot and a cool thing to shoot. But, you know, again, it's chronological. So we're at the end of this journey. And, you know, this was really about Ruben and Riz letting go. You know, this was that, what is that to let go? And so I rolled that camera. You know, we're shooting 35 millimeter and rolling is a thing, you know. It's not digital. And so I'm rolling a like 11-minute shot of him just sitting.
Wow.
And it wasn't until, you know, it took time. And then if you watch that shot, you see he's got these little stages where he's like, he looks like he's in his body, but then it's like, he actually hits this moment where he actually sinks into it. And that's where you cut, you know, you cut after he really lands.
No, just, sitting with him in that moment. And that's everything.
It's perfect.
Yeah, he finally is still. He sits.
He's still.
It's great.
He's still.
Isn't that a crazy thing though, on a writing level? You know, like I was saying this was what was so cool about this film to write and to make, is to think, how do you feel that? You know, that ostensibly is the least dramatic thing in the world, right? There's no sound. You've removed everything. It's a static shot. How do you feel that? How do you earn that? That's exciting to me. That's an exciting language.
Yeah, everything you're telling us right now is like,
it's gold.
Invaluable, and we appreciate it so much.
Well, what I will say, I mean, first of all, what you guys are doing as brothers is really beautiful. And, you know, like, you know, I obviously adore my brother, and, you know, we have been partners creatively for a long time. But he's 9 years younger than me. But, you know, really the fact that you guys write together and learn to trust your instincts and learn to respect kind of the process of, without being precious.
Yeah.
It's God, you guys are going to be in such great shape to direct.
Oh man, well,
we hope so.
Yeah, we hope so. It's when you watch movies like Sound of Metal, you kind of like, you get a little jealous. You're like, it's fucking perfect. Like I can never write something that.
It
good.
is. I was going to say that earlier. Like, it's a perfect film. It really is.
It is.
I gotta say, like, the cool thing about this podcast is, for us, is like we get to speak to someone like you, Darius, and you know, the other writers that we spoke with in, you know, this past couple of weeks, and the co-writer for Soul, Mike Jones. We spoke with him, and he told us about the Pixar's North Star. And it's like that moment that, like, as a writer, you strive to, like, you come up, you conjure up this idea, and it's perfect, and you got to stick to it. That, you know, the North Star. And I gotta say, your ending, like, as I'm watching the film, the ending is totally your North Star. You know, like, it's just like a moment, and I guess I want to ask you, I know you said you struggled with the ending there, but did you have an ending that you had to work towards?
I did. I mean, I struggled with the ending for a long time, but when I got that ending, you know, I always knew the essence of the ending. You know, I knew that where I wanted to end up. I knew that aspect of acceptance and stillness. I understood that it was just the how. It was the way. How do you peel back those layers? How do you do it? But yeah, it was the true north thing is something I really think about in screenwriting. I really try to earn that north and keep it in my. I'm doing it right now with another script, you know, and I really relate to that. It's in a way, you know, what I always talk about with everybody when we're making a film is, you know, you're not serving me and you're not serving the actors or anyone else. You're just serving the film.
Yeah.
That's we're all doing it. We're all doing it together. And, you know, that's how it sounds like you guys do that in the writing process. And that's certainly what I do. But when you have an ending that is what my word with Derek is undeniable, when you have that undeniable place, it doesn't mean you've earned it yet, but is that place, that frequency, that end, and you can serve it. And until you serve it, then you just toss that shit up and.
That's right.
Oh, I love it. Great callback.
Great callback.
No, like I said, yeah, just that's the coolest thing about this podcast is just being able to talk to people like you, you know.
Yeah. Right.
Oh man, this is so awesome, you guys. I'm so excited for you. I really am. I'm rooting for you.
Awesome.
Thanks.
Thank you so much.
You know, hang on to this thing, you know, like trust your instincts with people, especially. You know, only work with people you love. And the other thing is, you know, enjoy the not knowing everything. It's really something very few people will probably tell you, but you know, some of the best things in directing and filmmaking come from that, and you'll only get it once. You know, you only direct your first once, and allow yourself to not know and to go in, and you know, you're going to make choices. You're going to do all that. That's fine. But you're also going to discover some things, and you're going to try things that might be ill-advised because you don't know, and they might be the best things you do. So, you know, this notion of professionalism in art, it's a misnomer. You know, we never get there. Hopefully, if we're doing real work, we never fucking know. We have to be vulnerable and fragile every single time. And if we're not feeling that way, if we're experts, we've lost our way.
Yeah. Awesome.
Wow. Well said.
Yeah. Well said.
Did you write that down? Did you have that prepared?
I think we have it on record, so we'll play it.
Darius, thanks so much, man.
Yeah. Can't wait to see what you do next.
Yeah,
Seriously.
really.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, you guys, I'm rooting for you. Can't wait to see how it goes.
Awesome.
All right.
Thanks,
Take care.
Darius.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye,
Darius.
everyone.
Bye.